My mother handed my daughter's birthday present to my nephew, saying he deserved it. My daughter's eyes filled with tears, asking if she'd been bad. I hugged her and told her, "No, sweetie. Grandma just forgot who's been paying for her roof." So I stopped paying. When the roof started to collapse a month later, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The first migraine of the week had hit me right behind the left eye, a throbbing spike of pain that announced its presence just as the first guests were scheduled to arrive. I was leaning against the kitchen counter, my fingers pressed to my temple, when my daughter Lily, a whirlwind of pink tulle and 9-year-old excitement, danced into the room. "Are they here yet, Mommy? Is Grandma here?" I forced a smile, the simple act feeling like it pulled my entire face taut. "Not yet, sweetie. Why don't you go check on the balloons in the living room?" As she skipped away, I allowed myself a grimace. It wasn't just the migraine. It was the familiar, acidic knot of anxiety that always tightened in my stomach before a family gathering. For years, I had been the family's designated pillar. I was Cecilia, the structural engineer, the one who built bridges and, quite literally, kept the roofs over everyone's heads. I was the responsible one, the stable one. And, as I was so often reminded, the boring one. My sister, Judith, was the creative spirit. My mother, Deborah, was the retiree who deserved to be comfortable. I was just the checkbook. The doorbell chimed, and I plastered on the party's smile, pushing the pain to a dull roar in the back of my skull. The next hour was a blur of happy, screaming children, torn wrapping paper, and the sugary scent of cake. I watched Lily navigate her small universe of friends with a sweet, innate kindness that made my chest ache with pride. Then Deborah and Judith arrived, an hour late, sweeping in with a gust of perfume and loud apologies. My mother, Deborah, was 70 but carried herself with the entitled air of a duchess. My sister, Judith, trailed in her wake, holding her son Alan's hand. Alan, at 10, was already a carbon copy of his mother, all surface charm and lazy expectation. We're here," Deborah announced, kissing the air near my cheek. "Lily, darling, look at you." She gave Lily a cursory pat on the head before turning her full, beaming attention to her other grandchild. "Alan, my special boy, come give Grandma a hug." I bit the inside of my cheek. Breathe, it's Lily's day. Finally, it was time for presents. Lily sat in the center of the living room, a mountain of colorful paper around her. She had meticulously saved her grandmother's gift for last. It was the largest one, wrapped in elegant silver paper with a perfectly tied blue bow. "This one's from Grandma and Aunt Judith," Lily chirped, her eyes shining as she reached for it. "Ah," Deborah said, stepping forward. Her voice, though light, cut through the chatter. The children grew quiet. Deborah picked up the large, silver box. For a heart-stopping second, I thought she was just going to move it closer to Lily. Instead, she turned, walked the 3 steps to where Judith and Alan were sitting, and placed the enormous gift directly in Alan's lap. "There you are, my love," Deborah cooed, stroking Alan's hair. "This is for you. You've been such a good boy at your new school. He's the one who deserves it." The silence in the room was absolute. It was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Alan, after a flicker of confusion, ripped into the paper to reveal the expensive new gaming console he'd been begging for. "Wow, thanks, Grandma," he shouted. I didn't look at him. I couldn't tear my eyes away from my daughter. Lily hadn't moved. She sat frozen, her hands still outstretched for the gift she would not receive. Her bottom lip trembled, and her eyes, wide and luminous, found mine across the room. She didn't cry. She just whispered, in a voice so small it shattered my heart, "Mommy, did I do something bad?" The blood drained from my face. The migraine, the anxiety, the years of resentment, it all vanished, replaced by a glacial, diamond-hard clarity. I walked across the room, knelt in front of my daughter, and pulled her into a tight hug, burying my face in her strawberry-scented hair. I held her for a long moment, shielding her from the room, from the grandmother who had just publicly branded her as undeserving. I kissed the top of her head and whispered into her ear, so low that only she could hear me, "No, sweetie. You didn't do anything bad at all." Then I looked up, my gaze locking directly with my mother's. Deborah was already looking defensive, a familiar, pinched express. Cian on her face. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cause a scene. I just held my daughter's hand and spoke clearly into the silent room. "No, Lily," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Grandma just forgot who's been paying for her roof." My sister's jaw dropped. My mother's face flushed a deep, ugly red. I didn't care. The party was over. As I led Lily away to cut the cake, pretending nothing had happened for the sake of her friends, a switch had been flipped. It wasn't just a switch, it was a primary breaker. The betrayal was worse than any personal insult. It was a wound inflicted on my child. And as I cut the first slice of cake with a steady hand, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The bills for that roof had just come due. The last little guest, clutching a pink party bag, was picked up by their mother just as the sun began to dip, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. The moment the door clicked shut, the manufactured cheer evaporated. The house felt unnervingly quiet, littered with the wreckage of the party, stray ribbons, paper plates smeared with frosting, and the deafening silence of my daughter, who had retreated to her room. I found her sitting on her window seat, her party dress bunched up, staring at the new art set one of her friends had given her. She was listlessly running her fingers over the unopened box. "Hey, superstar," I said softly, sitting beside her. "That was some party, huh?" She didn't look at me. Why did Grandma give Alan my present? I chose my words with the precision of an engineer planning a load-bearing wall. Because Grandma is very confused sometimes, Lily. Her feelings get all tangled up, and she does things that don't make sense. It has nothing to do with you. You are the kindest, smartest, most deserving girl I know. Do you hear me? She nodded, leaning her head against my arm. She likes Alan more. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a cruel piece of data she was now forced to process. I hugged her, my own anger a cold, heavy stone in my gut. "I like you more," I whispered fiercely. "And I'm the one who matters." Later that night, after I had tucked a sleeping Lily into bed, her face still puffy from the tears she'd finally shed, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Judith. "Mom is really upset. You completely embarrassed her today. You know how sensitive she is. You need to apologize." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. Embarrassed her? I thought of Lily's face, her small voice asking if she was bad. The cold clarity I'd felt at the party hadn't faded. It had solidified. It had become a plan. I typed a single response, "No." I then opened my banking app. I had a separate account, one I'd named Family Maintenance. It was where I automatically funneled a significant portion of my salary every month. From this account, an array of automatic payments went out. The mortgage on Deborah's house, the property taxes, the homeowner's insurance, the landscaping service, the premium cable package, the electricity, the water. With a series of precise, deliberate taps, I canceled every single one of them. I left the mortgage payment active. I wasn't going to default on my own investment, but everything else was shut off. The utilities, the comforts, the services that made her life plush and effortless. Then, I transferred the remaining 5-figure balance of the maintenance account into a new, high-yield savings account under my name only, an account I titled Lily's Future. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Deborah. I looked at the screen, at the picture of my mother smiling on a vacation I had paid for. I silenced the call and set the phone face down on my nightstand. A strange, unfamiliar peace settled over me. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was resolve. For years, I had been propping up a structure that was fundamentally unsound. I had ignored the cracks in the foundation, the rot in the beams, all in the name of family. My mother and sister had grown accustomed to my support. They saw it not as a gift, but as an obligation. My success was their resource, my generosity their entitlement. They had become careless. They had forgotten that the hand that writes the checks is the hand that holds the power. They had forgotten who I was. I am a structural engineer. I don't just fix problems, I understand, fundamentally, what happens when a critical support is removed. The whole thing comes crashing down. I drifted off to sleep that night, not with the throbbing of a migraine, but with a singular, repeating thought. It was a line from a contract I had reviewed years ago, a clause I myself had drafted for one of my own projects. All maintenance and liability revert to the occupant in the absence of a superseding agreement. They had forgotten one crucial thing: I had the agreement, and they had just violated the terms. My mother, Deborah, had not always been a monster of entitlement. Or perhaps she had, and I had simply been trained not to see it. Growing up, our family dynamic was a case study in contrasts. I was the responsible one. I got straight A's, I babysat Judith, I balanced my first checkbook at 13. I was quiet, studious, and reliable. I was, in my mother's words, the easy one. Judith was the spirited one. She was dramatic, charming, and utterly, dazzlingly irresponsible. When she failed a class, it was because the teacher didn't understand her. When she crashed her first car, it was because the sun was in her eyes. And when she got pregnant at 22 by a man who vanished before the first trimester, it was a romantic tragedy. I was the one who went to college on a full academic scholarship, dragging myself through the grueling, male-dominated field of civil engineering. I was the one who worked 60-hour weeks, building a career from sheer grit. I was the one who bought a house, started a 401k, and had my daughter, Lily, with a man I had carefully, logically chosen, a choice that ended in a civil, logical divorce. Judith floated. She tried freelance photography, then graphic design, then aromatherapy. She lived in a series of shabby chic apartments, perpetually between opportunities, always needing just a little help to get her through the month. Help that I, invariably, provided. When my father passed away 10 years ago, the dynamic solidified. He had left behind a modest life insurance policy, which Deborah and Judith burned through in less than a year on a grief trip to Europe and a complete, unnecessary renovation of Judith's apartment. After that, the financial burden of my mother fell, unspoken, onto my shoulders. It started small. Cecilia, darling, my car insurance is due, and Judith's just had a setback. Then, Cecilia, the property taxes are just astronomical this year. 5 years ago, it had culminated in the house. The small rental she was in was being sold, and she had nowhere to go. She and Judith had come to me, their faces masks of practiced woe. "I'll be homeless, Cecilia," Deborah had cried. "At my age, can you imagine?" I couldn't, so, like the good, responsible daughter I was, I'd solved the problem. I'd found a solid, modest 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. I had my lawyers set up an LLC, and I'd purchased the property through it. It was a clean, smart investment. I told my mother it was taken care of. She interpreted taken care of as a gift. She moved in and immediately began referring to it as my house. I never corrected her. I paid the mortgage, the insurance, the taxes, and all the repairs. It was easier than having the fight. I just set up the family maintenance account and let it run, a silent, monthly sacrifice to keep the peace. The antagonist in this story, I realized, wasn't just my mother. It was a two-headed beast. Deborah was the face, the one who wielded the emotional guilt. But Judith was the quiet, insidious poison. Judith was the one who whispered in my mother's ear, validating her every selfish impulse. "Of course you deserve a new car, Mom. Cecilia can afford it. She barely spends any money on herself." A fact, because I was spending it on them. "Of course Alan deserves that console. Lily has so much already. Cecilia spoils her." Judith was the one who reaped all the benefits of my generosity while contributing nothing. She was a permanent resident in my mother's guest room, rent-free, with her son Alan. She ate my mother's food, used her utilities, and all of it was subsidized by me. She was a 42-year-old parasite, cloaking her envy of my success in the language of bohemian superiority. She was creative, while I was a corporate drone. At Lily's party, the beast had finally overplayed its hand. The casual, cruel slight was not just an impulse. It was a power move, a public declaration. It was Deborah and Judith reinforcing the family hierarchy. Alan was the deserving prince, Lily was the overlooked extra, and I was the utility. The bank, the roof. My phone had been buzzing with increasing frequency for the past 2 weeks. First, texts from Judith about the cable being out. Then, frantic calls from Deborah about the lawn service sending a rude collections letter. I had ignored them all. I'd set their numbers to go straight to voicemail. I sat at my desk, my office quiet in the late evening hum. I was reviewing a hydrology report for a new bridge project, my mind beautifully, blissfully clear. The report was full of data on soil saturation, hydrostatic pressure, and flow rates. It was a comfort. Concrete and steel, they don't lie, they don't manipulate, they simply are. But I had also been checking another report, the extended weather forecast. A massive low-pressure system was churning up the coast. It was due to make landfall in 3 days, bringing with it torrential rain and high winds. Deborah's house was old. The roof was, I knew from my last inspection, at the very end of its 20-year lifespan. I had, in fact, scheduled a full replacement for it, a $20,000 job. I'd been planning to pay for it from the maintenance fund right before the party. I'd canceled that too. I looked at the weather map, the angry swirls of red and purple. Then I looked at the new, untouched balance in Lily's future. They had forgotten one crucial thing. I thought, the phrase no longer a vague premonition but a sharp, defined fact. They had forgotten that the person they were stealing from was an engineer. I didn't just know the cost of that roof. I knew its exact load capacity, its flashing details, and its precise point of failure. The shift from passive victim to active strategist wasn't a thunderclap. It was the quiet, satisfying click of a deadbolt sliding into place. For the first 2 weeks of my silence, I had been operating on pure, cold anger. But as the 3rd week began and the storm warnings grew more dire, my professional instincts took over. Anger was a fuel, but I needed a blueprint. The clever trap was already in place. It had been for 5 years. The house was not in Deborah's name. It was held by C&L Properties, LLC, Cecilia and Lily. My mother was, legally speaking, a tenant at will in a property I owned. She had never signed a lease, never paid $1 of rent. She had no tenant's rights, no claim, no leverage. She had only the mistaken belief that my love was unconditional and her comfort was my responsibility. This was the leverage. This was the irrefutable fact that all their emotional drama would shatter against. But having leverage and using it are 2 different things. I needed to document the full scope of their entitlement. I needed data. I spent that weekend not in a state of anxiety, but in one of meticulous, focused investigation. I pulled every bank statement for the last 5 years associated with the family maintenance account. I created a spreadsheet, my fingers flying across the keyboard, a grim satisfaction growing with every line item. It was staggering. Mortgage payments, $102,000. Property taxes, $21,500. Homeowners insurance, $7,800. Utilities, electric, water, gas, $19,200. Premium cable and internet, $10,800. Landscaping and snow removal, $9,600. Repairs new water heater, plumbing emergency, $4,300. Emergency cash transfers to Deborah's account, $35,000. Judith's loans, car repairs, dental work, art supplies, $22,000. The grand total, in 5 years, was $232,200. I stared at the number, my migraine threatening a comeback. This wasn't support, it was financing. I had single-handedly funded their entire lives. I had paid for the food they ate, the water they drank, the television they watched, and the lawn they sat on. All while Judith lived there for free, contributing nothing, and my mother actively disdained my child. This spreadsheet was my weapon. This was the proof. My investigation didn't stop there. I needed to understand the why behind Judith's influence. On a hunch, I hired a private investigator. It felt overly dramatic, like something from a movie, but I needed to know what I was dealing with. I gave the pie a simple brief: a full financial and background check on my sister, Judith, and by extension, my mother. While the pie worked, the first bands of the storm began to lash the city. The wind howled outside my office window, and a heavy, persistent rain began to fall. My phone, which had been quiet for a few days, exploded. The first call I ignored, the second, the 10th. Then came the voicemails, each one more hysterical than the last. Cecilia, the lawn is a mess. The homeowners association sent a citation. You have to call the mowers. That was Judith. Cecilia, darling, my shows aren't recording. The cable is just off. I think a line is down. Can you handle it? I'm missing my stories. That was Deborah. Celia, are you getting these? The power just flickered and the basement is damp. It smells like mildew. You have to call someone. This is your responsibility. I listened to them, one after another, my expression unchanged. My responsibility. It was fascinating how they used that word. Then, the pie's report landed in my inbox. It was worse than I thought. Judith wasn't just a freelance graphic designer. She had a string of small claims court judgments against her for unfinished work. She hadn't filed a tax return in 3 years, but the most damning discovery was about my mother's finances. Deborah wasn't just living off me, she was actively funneling the emergency cash I gave her directly to Judith. But there was a final, sickening twist. The pie had uncovered emails. Judith, it seemed, had been advising my mother to explore her legal options for taking full possession of the house. She had convinced Deborah that since she had lived there for 5 years, she had a common law claim and that I, Cecilia, was emotionally withholding her rightful inheritance. They had already consulted a lawyer, a sleazy, bottom feeder type, to see if they could sue me for the deed. They weren't just parasites, they were predators. They were actively planning to steal the very asset I was paying for. The rain was coming down in sheets now. My phone rang again. It was Deborah. This time I answered. Cecilia, thank God, she shrieked, her voice thin with panic. It's a nightmare. There's water. It's coming in. Through the ceiling in the guest room, Judith's room, it's dripping all over. The roof is leaking. I leaned back in my chair, the spreadsheet glowing on my monitor. Oh dear, I said, my voice calm and cool. A leak, you say? That sounds like a serious structural issue. Yes, you have to call your people. Call your roofers, it's getting worse. My roofers? I asked. I paused, letting the silence stretch, filled only by her panicked breathing and the sound of dripping in the background. Mom, I think there's been a misunderstanding. That's not my roof to fix. What are you talking about? It's your house. No, I said, and the clarity in my own voice was absolute. It's my LLC, you are an occupant, and you haven't paid your rent. As of this moment, all maintenance and liability are your problem. Good luck. I hung up. The silence that followed my hanging up was, I imagined, deafening. It didn't last long. My phone immediately began to detonate with a rapid-fire volley of calls and texts, a digital tantrum of pure, unfiltered panic. I watched the screen light up. Judith. Mom, Judith, Mom, and calmly silenced my phone, placing it in my desk drawer. I went to the kitchen, made myself a cup of chamomile tea, and sat with Lily while she did her homework, helping her with fractions. For the first time in a decade, my mind was entirely my own. An hour later, there was a furious pounding on my front door. I'd been expecting this. I looked through the peephole. There they were, soaked to the bone, huddled on my doorstep like a pair of drowned rats. Judith was vibrating with rage, her face blotchy. My mother looked utterly bewildered, her hair plastered to her skull. I opened the door, leaving the storm chain engaged. They stood on the mat, dripping on my porch. Cecilia, Judith screamed, shoving at the door. Let us in, what did you do? I'm not letting you in, Judith, you're hysterical, I said calmly. And you're dripping. The house is being destroyed, my mother wailed, tears mixing with the rain. The ceiling is brown, it's falling, you have to help us. Help you, I repeated, my voice flat. Help you with what exactly? I seem to recall you being very clear on family roles. I'm the one who pays. Judith is the creative one. Alan is the deserving one. Lily is the undeserving one. So have Judith get creative and fix the roof. Or perhaps deserving, Alan can patch the drywall. Judith's face went purple. You witch, you did this on purpose. You knew the storm was coming. I am an engineer, Judith. I read weather reports. Of course I knew, I said. Just like I know the flashing around the chimney was compromised. I had it scheduled for repair, but I had to divert the funds. What does that mean? Deborah cried. It means, I said, my voice dropping, that I've been doing some accounting, and I've discovered a discrepancy. A $232,200 discrepancy, to be exact. They both stared at me, speechless. The number, so specific, had hit them like a physical blow. I don't know what you're talking about, Deborah stammered, her eyes shifting to Judith. Don't you? I smiled, a tight, cold expression that held no humor. I'm talking about the money I've spent funding your lives for the past 5 years. The mortgage, the taxes, the utilities, the endless loans to Judith. The cash I gave you, Mom, that you immediately handed over to her. Judith's eyes widened. You can't prove that. This was the moment. I'd had the Pies report printed. I held up the first page, a bank statement showing a $2,000 emergency transfer from me to Deborah, and a second, time-stamped document showing a $2,000 transfer from Deborah to Judith less than an hour later. Can't I asked. I'm a very thorough person, Judith. It's why I'm a good engineer. I have every receipt, every transfer, every loan you never intended to repay. And I have this. I held up the second document. It was a copy of the email exchange between her and the lawyer, the one where they discussed exploring options to sue me for the house. Deborah's face went ashen. She looked at Judith, her expression one of dawning, sickening horror. Judith, what is this? What did you do? She's lying, Judith shrieked, but her voice was shrill with panic. The lie was clumsy, desperate. She faked those. You're trying to trick us. You're trying to make Mom homeless. Make her homeless, I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. She is already ho. Melis, you both are. You are tenants in my property, and I am evicting you. You can't, Deborah shrieked. I'm your mother, I have rights. You have no rights, I said, my voice like ice. You have no lease. You have no claim. You are, in the eyes of the law, trespassers. I gave you a home out of love, and you tried to steal it. You humiliated my daughter in that home. You are done. The support is gone. The bank is closed. I looked past Judith, at my mother, who was now leaning against the doorframe, looking utterly broken. The house is ruined, Cecilia, she whispered. No, Mom, I said. The house is fine. It needs a new roof and some drywall. I'll have my team handle it, but you will not be living in it when it's done. You have 48 hours to get your things before I change the locks and have the rest junked. I unhooked the chain and started to close the door. Where are we supposed to go? Judith screamed, lunging at the door. I paused, holding the door open just a crack. I don't know, Judith. You're the creative one. I'm sure you'll think of something. I closed the door, slid the deadbolt, and walked away as they resumed pounding. Their shouts now just muffled, pathetic noise against the storm. The 48-hour grace period was an act of generosity, one they didn't deserve. It was also a strategic calculation. It gave them just enough time to panic, and just enough rope to, as I fully expected, hang themselves. My phone was a wasteland of increasingly desperate and vitriolic messages. Judith's texts devolved from threats of legal action, "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," to pathetic begging, "Ceci, please, Alan's new console is getting wet." My mother's voicemails were all sobs, a long, looping narrative of, "How could you do this to me? I'm an old woman, and this is all Judith's fault." I ignored it all. Instead, I was building my case. I wasn't just evicting them, I was dismantling the entire rotten structure of our relationship. I had my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Alvarez, draw up 2 sets of documents. The first was a formal notice of eviction and a restraining order against Judith, citing her threats and the email evidence of her conspiracy to commit fraud. The second set of documents was for my mother. It was an offer, a very, very different kind of offer. On the morning of the 3rd day, the storm had passed, leaving behind a bright, unnaturally clear blue sky. I drove to the house. As I'd expected, they were still there. A U-Haul truck wasn't in the driveway. Instead, Judith's beat-up sedan was. It looked like they hadn't packed a single box. They were sitting on the porch, surrounded by a few damp suitcases, as if expecting me to arrive, apologize, and call the movers. When I pulled up, Judith jumped to her feet. "Finally, did you call a roofer? And you owe us for a hotel. We had to sleep in the car." I walked past her, key in hand, and unlocked the front door. The smell of mildew and wet drywall hit me. The living room carpet squelched under my feet. A large, sagging brown stain dominated the ceiling, and a steady drip, 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 echoed from the kitchen, where a pot was overflowing on the floor. "It's a disaster," my mother whispered from the doorway, her face pale. "It's water damage, Mom. It can be fixed," I said, walking through the rooms. My contractors would have to gut the drywall in 2 rooms and treat for mold. And, of course, the new roof. A $40,000 repair, easily. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. At that, Judith seemed to find her spine. "What are we going to do? What are you going to do, Cecilia? This is your property. You let it get ruined. You're going to have to pay to fix it, and you're going to have to pay to house us while you do." I turned to her slowly. "Judith, you seem to be operating under a severe misapprehension. You are trespassing. I am here to change the locks. You have 10 minutes to get your remaining property and leave." "You can't just—" "Officer, she's right here," I said loudly. Judith froze. A uniformed police officer stepped out from behind my car, where he had been waiting. "Ma'am," he said, his voice polite but firm, "I have a restraining order here for you to vacate the premises. You need to take your belongings and leave." Judith's face went white. You called the cops on me, on your own sister." "You are not my sister," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "You are a con artist who tried to defraud me and who hurt my daughter. Get your things, now." Judith, finally realizing she had no cards left to play, that all her bluffs had been called, completely unraveled. She began to scream, a string of curses and insults, grabbing her son Alan's arm and dragging him toward her car, throwing her wet suitcases in the back. "You'll regret this, Cecilia. You'll be all alone, you miserable witch," she shrieked before peeling out, tires squealing. Now it was Ju. Sent me and my mother. She stood, shaking, in the damp, ruined hallway. She looked old, small, and utterly defeated. The spell was broken. The powerful, manipulative matriarch was gone, replaced by a terrified old woman. "Cecilia," she whispered, "please, I have nowhere to go. Judith. She has no money, I have nothing." "I know," I said. I walked to the dry dining room and placed a manila folder on the table. "That's why I've prepared this for you." She flinched, as if expecting to be served. "What is it?" "It's your future, Mom. Your only future," I said. I opened it. "I am not going to let you be homeless. But the days of you living off my work are over. This is a lease agreement." She stared at it. "I have already put a deposit down on a small, 1-bedroom senior apartment in the Pinewood complex. It's clean, it's safe, and it's all you need. The rent is $900 a month. This agreement stipulates that you will sign over your full monthly Social Security check of $1,300 to my LLC. My company will, in turn, pay your $900 rent, your $50 electric bill, and your $50 phone bill. The remaining $300 will be deposited into a debit account for you to buy your groceries and other necessities. I will not give you $1 more. Ever." She was silent, reading. "If you sign it," I continued, "you will have a roof over your head for the rest of your life." A simple, modest roof, but one that is guaranteed. If you do not sign it, I will walk out that door, and what happens to you next is your own problem. And Judith, she whispered, her eyes still on the paper. And Alan. Judith is gone. The restraining order is for 1 year. If she contacts you for money, if you give her so much as $1 from that debit card, this agreement is void and you will be on your own. She is no longer your concern, and she is certainly no longer mine. I held out a pen. This is the final offer, Mom, a roof or nothing, the choice is yours. She looked from the papers, to the ruined ceiling, to my face. Her hand trembled as she reached for the pen. The showdown didn't happen in a public forum. There was no family dinner, no ceremonial event. The final, definitive break was as quiet and sterile as the signing of a legal document. My mother sat at the dining room table, the pen in her hand, the lease agreement spread before her. The only sounds were the drip, 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 from the kitchen and the distant rumble of my contractor's truck pulling up outside. Deborah looked up at me, her eyes, for the first time, holding no manipulation, no entitlement, only a hollowed-out desperation. She's my daughter, Cecilia. How can I just abandon her? The audacity of it, after what they had done to my daughter, was breathtaking. The last flicker of pity I'd felt died. She abandoned you, Mom, I said, my voice hard. She abandoned you the moment she saw you as a tool to get to my bank account. She abandoned you when she put you in the legal line of fire by trying to steal my house. She abandoned you when she taught you that it was okay to humiliate your other granddaughter. Your favorites cost you your home. My neglect is the only thing offering you a new one. I tapped the signature line on the lease. Sign it, or walk out that door with her. You have 30 seconds to decide which daughter you're going to bet the rest of your life on. The one who's been bleeding you dry, or the one who's been paying your bills. She looked at the door, then back at the paper. The realization of her powerlessness was complete. Judith had no home, no money, no plan. She had only her anger. I had the apartment, the money, the plan. I had the roof. Her hand shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen, my mother, Deborah, signed her name. She slid the paper across the table. It was done. Good, I said, my voice crisp. I countersigned it and tucked one copy back in my folder. The apartment is ready. You can move in this afternoon. You're allowed 2 suitcases. I am having the rest of the contents of this house junked. They're contaminated with mold anyway. My furniture, she stammered. It's just stuff, Mom, I said, using a phrase she had often thrown at me when I'd been upset about something. You can't take it with you. The true climax, the triumphant moment, came an hour later. My mother was sitting in my car, silent, with her 2 small bags in the back as we drove to her new apartment. My phone rang. It was Judith. I looked at the screen, then handed the phone to my mother. This is your first test, Mom, I said. She looked at the ringing phone, her face a mask of terror. What do I do? You can answer it and be homeless, or you can block the number and be housed. Your choice. The phone rang and rang. Judith, knowing our mother was with me, was desperate. Finally, my mother's trembling finger pressed the block button. She let out a long, shuddering sigh and looked out the window, tears rolling silently due. Her cheeks. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a change of heart. It was a capitulation. A surrender to a reality she could no longer deny. I dropped her at the sterile, beige leasing office of the Pinewood Apartments, handed her the debit card with its first $300 balance, and the key to her new life. Cecilia, she said, her hand on the car door, I'm sorry about Lily. Don't be, I said, not looking at her. You taught her a very valuable lesson, one I should have learned a long time ago. You taught her the difference between family and a liability. Goodbye, Mom. I didn't watch her walk inside. I pulled away, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt light. The $232,000 burden was gone. The $40,000 repair on my own asset was just a business expense. I had my daughter, I had my career, and I had my peace. The structure was sound. The downfall of the antagonists was not swift and dramatic. It was a slow, pathetic fade into the consequences they had built for themselves. Judith, I heard through the grapevine, lasted about 3 weeks. With no money and no one to mooch off, she and Alan were forced to move 3 states away to live with Alan's paternal grandparents, people she had previously despised. Her last act was to send me a single, venomous email, which I routed directly to Ms. Alvarez. The restraining order was extended, and a formal cease and desist was filed. After that, there was only silence. My mother, Deborah, settled into her new life. The first few months were rocky. She called me twice, crying because her debit card was empty and it was still a week before her Social Security check was due. I didn't refill it. "You'll have to budget better, Mom," I'd said, and hung up. It was a hard, cold lesson in mathematics, one she was finally forced to learn. Our relationship, if you could call it that, was transactional. I saw her once a month when I dropped off her mail. We did not do holidays. She was, as per our agreement, not allowed near Lily. Her apology had been too little, too late. The damage to my daughter's heart was not something I was willing to risk repeating. As for the house, my contracting team was magnificent. They gutted the water-damaged sections, replaced the entire roof with high-end, 30-year shingles, and remediated the mold. With the parasites gone, I found I actually liked the little house. It was a solid asset. I had my team install new floors and a modern kitchen. 6 weeks later, I put it on the rental market. It was leased in a day to a lovely young couple, providing a steady, reliable income. The house, finally, was doing what it was always meant to do. It was an investment, no longer a black hole. The resolution, for me, was in Lily's future. The account, which had started with the diverted maintenance funds, had become my new project. The money I had been pouring into the family void, I now poured into it. A year after the party, I sat with Lily at our kitchen table, her 10th birthday cake between us. She was bright, happy, and thriving. The shadow of that day had faded, replaced by the security of a mother who had chosen her, unequivocally. "I have a surprise for you," I said, sliding my laptop over to her. I showed her the account. It was not just the $232,200 I documented. It was that, plus a year of aggressive, focused saving. The balance was well over $300,000. "What is that, Mommy?" she asked, her eyes wide. "That, sweetie, is your You Are Deserving fund," I said. "It's your college. It's a down payment on your first house. It's your startup business. It's anything you want it to be. It's the roof over your head, the one you'll build for yourself. And no one," I said, tapping the screen, "will ever be able to take it away from you." She threw her arms around my neck. "I love you, Mommy." "I love you more, baby," I whispered, holding her tight. My phone, resting on the counter, was blissfully silent. The only sound was my daughter's laughter. The leak was fixed. The rot was gone. The foundation was, at long last, secure.